Revenge with Karen.
I knew something was off the second Carl walked in without knocking. He had that smug I just watched a YouTube video on leadership look, like firing someone made his protein shake taste better. It was Q3 close, our most chaotic week of the year, and I had just hit send on the final checklist packet for vendor disbursements. 18 vendors, $30 million, one protocol. Mine. He didn't sit, didn't even look me in the eye, just slapped a white envelope on my keyboard like it owed him money. "We don't need your checklists," he said. His tone had that sanitized confidence of someone who'd never had to clean up his own mess. "We're streamlining, effective immediately." I stared at the envelope, not because I was surprised. Carl had been circling like a vulture ever since he came in from that consulting gig in Chicago, but because I knew what was in that checklist packet. What was always in that packet would happen if it didn't run its course. I didn't cry, didn't argue, just picked up my chipped coffee mug, the one that said world's okayest compliance officer, and stood. "Good luck," I said, which, if we're being honest, is the corporate version of go to hell. I walked past two interns trying not to make eye contact, through the glass hallway that always smelled like printer toner and bad decisions. Security was already waiting. They asked if I had any company devices. I handed over my badge and said, "Just the mug." I didn't look back. Before we go further, quick sidebar: if this is the kind of slow burn revenge story you're into, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Apparently 93% of y'all listen without subscribing, and the team's out here fueling these stories with cold coffee and spite. It really helps us keep going. Okay, back to Carl's career suicide. Let's be clear, Carl didn't fire me because I was bad at my job. He fired me because I was invisible, and because he didn't understand what I actually did. To him, I was just the checklist lady, the one who always asked annoying questions during payment cycles, the one who flagged contracts and refused to let shortcuts slide, the one who insisted every outgoing dollar had to pass a series of controls, cross-references, vendor-specific clauses, final QA sign-offs. A bottleneck, he called it. Deadweight. Legacy operations bloat, according to the internal memo someone would forward to me 2 days later. What he didn't know, and what no one had ever cared to ask, was that the checklist wasn't just a formality. It was a multi-layered disbursement protocol I designed from scratch, built over 8 years of watching this company nearly implode from payment fraud, vendor noncompliance. One especially ugly incident involving a forged invoice from a construction vendor who didn't exist. Every line item had a reason. Every step was connected to internal controls and vendor-side verification systems. And I was the only one with the keys. So when Carl purged me from the system, like expired yogurt, he also unknowingly amputated the last line of defense between Pinnacle IQ and a contract landmine. I went home that night and watched Jeopardy with my cat Basil. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired, not even my sister. Let them enjoy their streamlining. I had no intention of playing martyr, but around 11:40 p.m. I got a text from Laura in Treasury. Just a screenshot. "Carl in Slack, first act done. Next, purge legacy bottlenecks. Kill the compliance folders and start fresh. We'll automate this by EOD." Underneath it, she wrote, "He's nuking your drives." I just stared at the screen for a long time. Then I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from something funny, but the kind that floats up when you know exactly what's coming, and they don't. Because here's the thing about building a system no one understands. They also don't know how badly they need it until it breaks. Carl probably thought he looked like a visionary that morning, pacing the hallway like a caffeinated prophet of efficiency. Truth is, he looked more like a guy who just discovered the delete button and thought it made him a genius. His first order of business after axing me: open Slack. Drop a brag bomb in the ops lead's channel, first act done. Next, purge legacy bottlenecks, followed by a winking emoji. Then he tagged Kyle, our junior ops analyst who still used Comic Sans in his Outlook signature, and added, "At Kyle B, let's clean house. Delete all compliance folders from shared drive. Kill the redundant checklists. Start fresh." Kyle replied with a thumbs up, like he was confirming a pizza order. The thing about those folders Carl just ordered deleted, they were the digital DNA of our payment system. The checklists weren't just PDFs with bullet points. They were dynamic, living documents synced to our vendor contract clauses, tied to escalation triggers, and in some cases, mirrored into a sandbox server on the vendor side. One wrong move, one missing box ticked, and the system wouldn't just notify someone. It would activate Clause 7C, initiate vendor-side review and hold disbursement, which is exactly what happened. Somewhere around 9:15 a.m., Treasury's dashboard flashed an amber alert. Final QA confirmation incomplete. Vendor review initiated. At first, they assumed it was a glitch. Happens during EOM sometimes when someone forgets to close a ledger. But then Laura tried to override it using the emergency access template and got a rejection code. Override not available. Authorized compliance officer required. That would have been me. But I was home, in sweatpants, watching Carl burn the house down with a grin on his face. At 9:42, I got a new message from another ex-colleague, Devin, one of the good ones who knew better than to trust a man who said synergy 5 times in one meeting. It was another Slack screenshot. This one showed Kyle asking Carl if he should back up the compliance folders before deleting them. Carl's reply? Nah, if she built anything worth keeping, she would have trained someone. We're not archiving junk. And just like that, 8 years of architecture gone, vaporized by a man who thought you could reboot a payments ecosystem the same way you reinstall a printer driver. What they didn't realize, what Carl never bothered to ask, was that deleting my checklist folders didn't just remove documentation. It severed a series of vendor flag triggers, including 2 mandatory checkpoints embedded in our primary supplier's contract. Checkpoints that had to be manually verified and digitally signed by yours truly. My initials, my credentials, not just anyone with an account. They hadn't even read the contract. Hell, I doubt Carl even knew there was a Clause 7C. And the system, it didn't care about Carl's title. It didn't care about Slack messages or performance metrics or new era roadmaps. It just followed logic. Checklist not confirmed, QA sign-off missing, trigger vendor-side review, lock disbursement, escalate, which is why, by 10:30 a.m., 28 invoices worth $30 million were sitting frozen in limbo, blinking red on Treasury's console. Half the team was refreshing dashboards. The other half was Googling override payment system Pinnacle IQ. Someone even suggested unplugging the main server, like this was a fax machine with attitude. And me? I was sitting on my balcony, coffee in hand, watching birds fight over a stale donut in the parking lot. Quiet rage swirled just beneath the surface. Rage not from being fired, but from being erased. Like I hadn't kept this place upright through 2 audits, a merger, and 1 embezzlement scandal the CEO still pretended never happened. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted them to see it, to feel it, the absence, the weight of what they'd thrown away. And they would, 1 frozen payment at a time. By 10:52 a.m., the beast groaned to a halt. At first, Treasury thought it was just network lag, maybe a blip in the VPN, or one of the regional servers hiccuping like it did during that infamous snowstorm in Q1. But then the status lights changed, amber to red. Then the export log froze completely. All outgoing vendor wires, 28 in total, were stuck in a queue labeled, pending final CA authorization, vendor-side hold initiated. Carl was in a stand-up with procurement when he got the ping. Didn't even read the full message before grunting. It'll self-resolve by EOD. These systems jam all the time. Classic move from someone who's never clicked more than 2 tabs in an ERP without breaking something. Meanwhile, Kyle, the junior analyst with a fake diploma frame from Arizona State, printed on a napkin, was furiously combing through his onboarding packet, trying to find the login credentials for the QA override module. He thought maybe it was buried in one of the Excel sheets he skimmed during training. It wasn't, because it never existed for him. You see, when I designed the final authorization protocol, I had one very simple rule. The override key cannot be assigned to anyone who doesn't understand what it's overriding. I'd seen what happened when access was handed out like breath mints. Nearly lost $400K once because a VP in marketing thought submit invoice meant cut check. So no, Kyle didn't have access. Neither did Carl. Neither did the CEO. There was one login with that power. Mine. And as of 8:37 a.m., that login had been deactivated. By 11:14 a.m., Treasury was no longer whispering. They were full-on triaging. The head of AR, Chandra, Called legal and asked if anyone could contact the vendor directly to manually override the block. Legal replied with a curt, "Not without breaching Clause 7C." Then promptly asked, "Wait, what is Clause 7C again?" That's when the dread started leaking in, like a gas you don't notice until you're lightheaded. The system wasn't down, it was responding, just like I programmed it to. See, the vendor's portal wasn't just linked to our internal pipeline, monitored the disbursement path like a hawk. My final checklist didn't just exist for compliance theater, it was a real-time gate. When not completed, it triggered a smart contract clause on the vendor's side that automatically froze delivery schedules and enforced payment review. It was smart, brutally smart, and now it was doing exactly what it was meant to do. I watched it unfold from my home office, sipping tea like I was attending a live performance of a play I wrote and directed. The irony? Carl was right about one thing: I hadn't trained anyone. But that wasn't negligence. That was intentional. Because for 8 years, every time I tried to share the full system, how the triggers worked, how the review escalations fired off, how Clause 7C was wired into our vendor auto-review engine, someone would wave me off. "We trust you, Patricia. No need to overcomplicate. Just keep doing what you're doing." So I did. And now they were face to face with the invisible scaffolding they'd torn down. Carl's Slack pinged again. "Who has QA override access? Anyone know if Patricia documented that?" The silence in the thread was almost poetic. Kyle finally wrote, "Can't find override login. Only record I see is a PDF titled Access by Design. Do not clone with her initials." Carl didn't reply. Could have texted Laura and told her the truth right then. Could have made it all go away with one sentence. But I didn't. I set down my mug, opened my old work laptop, now safely wiped and reformatted, and opened the vendor dashboard from the guest account they'd given me last week after they found out I'd been let go. There it was. The hold notice, there it was. The missing signature field, there it was. The line that read, "Awaiting authorized QA lead sign-off, P. Simmons," and below it in smaller text, "Unauthorized overrides will trigger contract breach escalation." I didn't touch a thing. I just leaned back in my chair, pulled a blanket over my lap, and whispered to no one in particular, still think I was redundant. At 12:07 p.m., the Zoom call went live, and it was already a disaster before anyone said a word. 6 boxes lit up across the screen. Treasury, legal, procurement. Carl, the CEO, late and annoyed, joined a minute in, fiddling with his AirPods like they were alien technology. Everyone was talking over each other, tossing around words like minor delay and workflow misalignment, like throwing buzzwords at the fire would somehow put it out. Then came the 7th box, a muted screen that blinked once, then steadied. Judd Wilkins, CEO, Lockridge Industrial Supply. Now, Judd wasn't your average vendor CEO. He wasn't slick or suit-polished, wore a flannel shirt, had a voice like gravel, and the kind of face that looked like it had argued with windstorms and won. The man had built his empire on freight, grease, and contracts that left no room for interpretation. He unmuted. "Well, this is a first," he said, looking dead into the camera. "Didn't expect a personal invite to a vendor call. Must be serious." The room fell awkwardly silent. Carl jumped in first. "Just wanted to get ahead of a minor processing hiccup, something with the checklist system." Judd chuckled, not politely, not cruelly, just the kind of chuckle you give someone right before dropping a truth they'll choke on. "Ah, the checklist. Clause 7C, my favorite." Carl's smile thinned. "We believe the process can be expedited if we simply reassign the final authorization." "You believe wrong," Judd said flatly. Clause 7C states, and I quote, "Disbursement override requires verification of the QA checklist signed by the authorized compliance officer listed in Appendix B." He leaned closer to the screen. "Who's your compliance officer these days?" Legal froze. Treasury looked at Carl. Carl blinked. "Well, technically that was Patricia Simmons," he mumbled. "She's no longer with the company." Judd sat back in his chair. The camera shook slightly. For a second, it looked like he might end the call. Then he started laughing. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was the laugh of a man who saw this exact screw-up coming a mile away and let it happen anyway. "Well then," he said, wiping his eyes, "guess you don't get your inventory." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was hollow. The kind of silence that hits when someone drops a casket full of truth in the middle of a meeting, and no one has the emotional vocabulary to deal with it. Judd leaned forward again. Warned you repeatedly. That checklist isn't optional. It's part of the escrow release tied to our insurance, tied to our own shipment guarantees. You lose that checklist, you lose your payment queue. You lose the payment queue, you lose the shipment. Simple as that. Procurement tried to jump in. Surely we can, nope, Judd cut in. Not unless you got Patricia back in the building, or a legal amendment to the vendor contract that's not 12 hours old. I'm guessing you don't. The CEO finally found his mute button. Mr. Wilkins, surely we can find a short-term fix. Nope, Judd said again, calmer this time. You don't get your steel, you don't get your fasteners, you don't get your quarterly restock. And if I were you, I'd start crafting a lovely little email to your investors, because Q3's about to look real thin. Carl's neck flushed red, kind of red that crawls out from the collar and betrays just how much pressure is building behind your eyes. He started to say something, but stopped. What was he going to say? Oops. Judd stared for a beat longer, then added, I like Patricia. Smart, quiet, never missed a checkpoint in 8 years. You should have promoted her. Hell, you should have built a whole department around her. But you didn't. He glanced at something off-screen, probably a shipping dashboard. Then, almost as an afterthought, added, Oh, and tell your team not to bother calling our internal compliance line. We've got a block on any overrides unless it comes from her. That was her idea, actually. Pretty smart, huh? Then he clicked leave meeting, just like that. The call didn't end, it deflated. No one said anything, not legal, not treasury. Not even the CEO, who was now rubbing his temples like he was trying to press Control+Z on his whole morning. Carl finally broke the silence. We'll figure it out. Nobody looked at him, because everyone in that room knew Carl hadn't just deleted some folders. He deleted the only person who could keep the wheels from coming off. The spiral didn't start with shouting. It started with silence, kind that creeps into a conference room when everyone realizes the grown-up in charge is actually just a guy who Googles Excel hack and calls it innovation. The second Wilkins left the Zoom call, legal went pale. Not from rage, not yet, but from something worse, awareness. The kind that dawns too late, when you realize you just watched the train leave the station and you're standing on the wrong track. Someone get me the most recent copy of that checklist, arced the CEO. Carl shifted in his chair, eyes darting. It was in the compliance folder. Laura from Treasury, voice tight, the compliance folder you told Kyle to delete a beat. Carl rubbed his chin like a man hoping facial hair would sprout and make him look wiser. We have backups, probably, right? IT was looped in within minutes. They spun up old archive servers, pulled snapshots from the week before. But the issue wasn't technical, it was functional. Yes, there were checklists, but most were drafts, unfinalized, some with watermarks that read "Do not use, version deprecated." Others referenced clauses that had been rewritten during last year's vendor renegotiation. No signatures, no time stamps, no final field confirmations. The most recent signed version, 8 months old. Irrelevant, and the only person who could even explain the updates. Sitting at home, probably watching the fallout unfold like a Netflix docuseries, she secretly wrote. Legal paced like panicked wizards. Procurement kept asking if Wilkins was bluffing. Treasury had stopped blinking. And Carl did what all middle managers do when cornered. He got defensive. This isn't about a damn checklist, he snapped. It's about operational redundancy. She should have built out the system with knowledge transfer in mind. If she didn't document it, that's on her. Or normally the most diplomatic person in the building, shot back. She did document it, you deleted it. And just like that, the air changed. The boardroom, the one Carl had once strutted through like a rooster with stock options, started closing in on him. Not physically, but socially. The eyes turned. The side glances sharpened. Somewhere in the background, accounting tried to triage the numbers. They pulled archived disbursement logs, trying to piece together old processes, but they found only made things worse. Outdated approval flows, vendor codes that had since rotated, and cherry on top, a few checklists signed not by Patricia, but by a former compliance officer who'd retired during the Obama administration. In short, useless. Then came the first real clue, a breadcrumb from the intern pool, of all places. Maya, a junior analyst barely 2 months into her role, raised her hand in the corner of the operations war room. Everyone ignored her at first, but she kept it up, and finally, someone asked what she wanted. I remember Patricia saying something," she said, nervous but clear. "That the vendor system doesn't just wait for the checklist. It pings her directly before any payment batch goes out." Carl frowned. Pings her? Yeah, like a pre-release notification. She called it a trust tripwire. It was in place in case someone tried to override the system or run a batch without QA sign-off. The room went dead again. Laura leaned forward. "Are you saying Wilkins's system automatically notifies Patricia before releasing anything?" Maya nodded. "She said it was hardwired during the contract rebuild, said it was non-negotiable." And just like that, the last thin string holding Carl's credibility snapped. The CEO stood up. "So let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You deleted the only signed checklists, burned the version control logs, and terminated the only person who has authority to clear a $30 million disbursement." Carl stammered. "It wasn't, it was supposed to be symbolic. A reset. I was going to rebuild, legal cut in. You think you can rebuild a compliance structure mid-quarter while staring down a breach clause?" No one was yelling. Not yet. The tension was thick enough to suffocate a lesser man. Carl's face was now a patchwork of splotchy red and office-grade sweat. The CEO looked to Laura. "Do we have any way to reach Patricia?" Laura hesitated. "Not directly. Her work contacts are deactivated. Her personal, she's not responding, and I'm not sure she will." Carl tried to regain footing. "Let's just offer her a temp contract, a one-off consulting gig. She'll come back." Laura said the thing no one else would. "She won't. Not for you." And that's when it finally hit Carl, not just the mess he made, but the fact that he wasn't going to be the one to fix it. He had pulled the wrong thread. And now the whole thing was unraveling. The emergency board call was set for 3:00 p.m. sharp, but the dread showed up around 2:45. Carl sat stiff in the center of the conference table, collar wilted, tie loosened, tapping a Mont Blanc pen like it was a detonator. To his left, the CEO stared into his coffee like it might whisper a miracle. Legal had gone full ghost mode, camera off, mic muted, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Treasury and procurement were in the background, silent, but visibly bruised from the morning's failures. Then the investors joined. One by one, polished faces popped onto the Zoom wall like a jury of well-dressed executioners. It was Mallory Crane from Vanguard Holdings, always smiling like a shark that just ate a competitor. Hal Strauss from Northcrest Capital, a man who hadn't blinked since 2015. And Terrence Wu from Sentinel Partners, who didn't say much but whose raised eyebrow was basically an indictment. Carl cleared his throat, forced a smile, and dove into a speech he'd definitely practiced in the mirror. "Thanks for joining on short notice. There's been a minor, temporary, with our Q3 vendor disbursements. We're in the middle of a process handoff following a recent restructuring of compliance ops. Standard hiccup." He paused for effect, waiting for nods. What he got instead was a new box lighting up on screen. Judd Wilkins. He wasn't invited. He wasn't on the agenda. And yet, there he was, center frame, flannel shirt, arms crossed, face a blend of smug and bored. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Just thought I'd sit in. After all, your vendor queue has me listed as the primary fulfillment node. Thought I'd see how the sausage gets made." The CEO blinked. "Mr. Wilkins, this is a private." Judd ignored him. Eyes locked on Carl. "Who's your authorized compliance officer now?" Carl shifted. "As I was just explaining, we're in the midst of a process. I didn't ask about your process." Judd cut in. "I asked who signs your QA disbursement checklist per Clause 7C. Silence. CEO tried to recover. "We're exploring interim options while Judd held up a piece of paper. Or maybe it was a screenshot. The image was blurry, but the top was unmistakable. Pinnacle X vendor disbursement contract. He read aloud, "All outgoing payments exceeding $1M require completion and sign-off of QA checklist by named compliance officer." And below that, he leaned into the camera. Name listed, Patricia Simmons. Carl opened his mouth, closed it, reopened it. "We're exploring external consulting relationships," he managed, trying to sound composed. Judd smirked. Translation, "We fired the only person who could close this quarter." The reaction from the investors was subtle but deadly. Mallory's smile faded, replaced by a flat line of disapproval. Hal leaned back and began scribbling something. Terrence Wu, still staring. Still eyebrow raised, except now it was higher. The CEO tried to reroute. Carl's goal was to modernize workflows. We've had issues in the past with overdependence on legacy personnel. Oh, you mean the legacy personnel who's currently listed as the sole trigger for inventory release on my end? Judd shot back. You'll get your restock when I get that signature. And not before. He held up a hand. I'm not here to argue. I'm just here to inform. Trucks are parked. Warehouses are sealed. And the longer that queue sits, more your timeline collapses inward. He turned slightly, almost casual. But hey, keep innovating. Then he left the call. No wave, no goodbye, just gone. The silence that followed wasn't technical. It wasn't a glitch. It was the full weight of humiliation settling into the bones of every executive on that call. Carl looked down at the table like it had betrayed him. Terrence Wu spoke first, voice cold and clean. To clarify, your new CFO eliminated a mission-critical position, purged the audit logs, and now you can't process vendor payments during Q3. Carl tried to jump in. It wasn't framed that way. Hal Strauss cut him off. Do you have any idea how this looks from our side? Mallory Crane didn't say anything. She just typed, loudly. The CEO finally exhaled, long and slow. We'll contact Patricia. Carl turned, surprised. I can do that, no. CEO said, without looking at him. You've done enough. And for the first time all day, Carl didn't argue. He just sat there, deflating like a novelty balloon that realized the party was over, and nobody noticed it had popped. The board reassembled 30 minutes later. Fewer faces this time. The CEO looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour, staring at his phone like it owed him an apology. Carl was absent, sent home to regroup, which was corporate speak for go hide while we clean up your mess. Legal remained ghostly silent, which was probably smart, considering the legal fire they were about to walk into. The mood was different now. No more frantic energy. No performative optimism. Just the slow, sinking weight of inevitability. Then, right as the meeting was about to open, a familiar voice cut in through the speaker system. Before we begin, said Wilkins, who had somehow found his way back into the call, again uninvited, again completely unbothered, I think there's one detail you should all be aware of. The CEO sat up. Mr. Wilkins, we're currently an internal. Wilkins ignored him. Last Thursday, we offered Patricia Simmons a consulting retainer. She accepted. Silence. He let it hang there like a guillotine over a guilty neck. We anticipated a shake-up on your end. Call it a hunch. Word reached us that your CFO had a streamlining initiative. We took proactive steps to protect our supply chain. He paused, then added, like it was just another Tuesday, so now she works for us. You could practically hear legal's collective spine stiffen. One of the board members, the guy from Sentinel Partners with the marble office and iron jawline, tilted forward, hands steepled, processing. Are you saying, he said slowly, that the only person authorized to clear our disbursement queue now works for the vendor? Wilkins smiled. I'm saying the only person who knows how your system actually works now works for the one entity contractually empowered to freeze your operations. Another pause. Then he added, and she's very loyal. In case you're wondering. The CEO looked over at legal. Is he bluffing? Legal shook their head. Law 7C states that only the named QA compliance officer may authorize override. The name is hard-coded. Patricia Simmons. There's no substitution clause. Can't we just amend it? Another board member asked. Yes, legal replied with a full vendor contract renegotiation, which would take 60 to 90 days, assuming the vendor agrees. They don't have to. Wilkins chuckled. We won't. Not while Q3's live. Someone swore under their breath. Another muted their mic to yell at someone off-screen. The room, physical and virtual, was imploding. And somewhere, off-screen, Patricia was likely sipping tea again, watching the world catch up to the chessboard she'd built with maddening precision. The CEO dropped his voice, almost like he was hoping the call wasn't being recorded. What does she want? Wilkins leaned back, thoughtful. She hasn't said. Yet. But I'd start by assuming it's more than an apology and a gift basket. He looked directly into the camera. You had 8 years to appreciate her. Now you'll pay for the hours you ignored. He ended the call without another word. The boardroom was still again. But this silence felt different. Not panicked. Not confused. This was the silence of realization. Every safeguard, every lockdown control, every bureaucratic booby trap that had been keeping Pinnacle IQ clean for nearly a decade had a name on it. Patricia Simmons. That name wasn't on their payroll anymore. It was on the other side. and it was sitting at the gate, holding the only key that mattered. Someone exhaled. Finally. Get her on the phone, the CEO said. Laura shook her head. She's not answering. The CEO's jaw tensed. Try again. Email, text. FedEx a damn fruit basket if you have to. Laura didn't move. She just looked down at her phone and read Patricia's out-of-office reply aloud. Thank you for reaching out. I am currently unavailable while fulfilling my role as lead compliance consultant, J. Wilkins Holdings. For contract-related inquiries, please direct all communications to my legal counsel. She didn't laugh. No one did, but everyone heard it between the lines. Patricia wasn't gone. She was upgraded, repositioned, weaponized, and she was just getting started. The vote wasn't even close. Carl was out. Board didn't bother dressing it up with euphemisms like leave of absence or realignment of responsibilities. They just asked him to leave the building, effective immediately. His access was revoked before the door clicked shut behind him. Even the intern who used to bring him his weird oat milk espressos didn't say goodbye. By 5:10 p.m., Carl's nameplate was already gone. Someone had dropped it face down in the recycling bin. The CEO, usually composed to the point of comatose, looked like a deflated bouncy house. His shirt clung to him like guilt. Everyone else in the boardroom pretended not to notice the sweat collecting at his temples. So what now? Someone asked. He didn't answer, just stared at his phone. Then, with a sigh like he was preparing to swallow a live scorpion, he hit call on Patricia's number. Voicemail. No surprise. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. He tried her personal email. Bounce back? Finally, with trembling fingers, he forwarded her former corporate email to his assistant. Find her, now. At 5:27 p.m., the assistant returned. She has an out-of-office reply. The CEO motioned to read it aloud. She did. Thank you for your message. I am currently unavailable while fulfilling my role as lead compliance consultant, J. Wilkins Holdings. For contract-related inquiries, please direct all communications to my legal counsel, Daniel Kraft, Kraft & Benson, LLP. The room went silent again, not because they didn't understand, because they did. Patricia hadn't just walked away. She'd drawn a line. One lined with attorneys and contracts and ironclad leverage. There would be no hallway conversations, no guilt-tripped re-entry. No hey, can we talk real quick? She'd removed herself from their reach, priced her return like a hostile takeover. The CEO stood up, pacing now, one hand on his hip, the other gripping his phone like it might scream the answer if he squeezed hard enough. Send her a direct message, he muttered. Skip legal, make it personal. Tell her we're prepared to match their offer. What's the offer? Someone asked. The CEO shrugged. Doesn't matter. Triple her salary, full authority, department rebuild, anything. I just want that damn checklist signed. Minute later, the message was sent. Subject line, let's talk. Patricia, the board has removed Carl. We recognize the mistake and are ready to reinstate you in a leadership role. Whatever Wilkins is paying will match. Please respond. Time is of the essence, M. At 5:46 p.m., her reply landed. One sentence. All terms must go through my attorney. That was it. No greeting, no thank you. No apology accepted, just the cold stamp of boundary and leverage. The CEO didn't swear, didn't sigh. He just sat down slowly, like the truth had finally found its way into his bones. They had broken something they couldn't rebuild, and now they'd have to buy it back if she was even selling. Around the room, the remaining executives traded glances. No one said it aloud, but it hung in the air like ozone before a lightning strike. She'd won. Not through sabotage, not with revenge porn or email leaks or some viral exposé. She'd done it with precision, with patience, with the one thing they all underestimated, indispensability wrapped in silence. And now, to fix what they'd broken, there was only one fix. Her terms, her turf, her lawyer. The company wasn't being held hostage. It was being audited by karma. The final emergency call wasn't just a meeting. It was a confession booth built from panic, pride. $30 million on the line. Everyone showed. The full board, every investor. The CEO, who now looked less like a leader and more like a man who'd seen the future and realized it didn't include him. Treasury, legal, procurement, everyone you'd expect at a last rites ceremony for quarterly close. And Judd Wilkins, of course, front and center. Flannel, unbothered, like he was watching reruns of a game he already won. At exactly 6 o'clock p.m., one last box lit up. Patricia Simmons. She joined from what looked like a quiet home office. A soft lamp behind her, a plant. No visible flex, no big dramatic reveal. Just calm, control, stillness. Her face unreadable, her tone clinical. "Good evening," she said. And just like that, the room quieted. Even the investors stopped pretending to check their emails. Wilkins leaned forward, arms crossed. "I believe we're here to discuss the one thing that still isn't moving." Patricia nodded once, then shared her screen. It was a form everyone in the company had seen 1,000 times, but never really looked at. The QA disbursement checklist, the final step in Pinnacle X payment pipeline. Dozens of line items, all green, except one. At the very bottom, in bold, blinking red, QA final sign-off, SH, next to it, a blank field, waiting for her initials. Wilkins pointed at the screen. "That's a $30M line item right there. You want trucks to roll? That box needs to be ticked." The CEO, clearly coached and trembling under it, jumped in. "Patricia, let's put this behind us. We're prepared to reinstate you immediately. Double your old salary, VP title, full autonomy over the department." Patricia didn't blink. She just said no, a beat. "Then, sign the consulting retainer." The CEO faltered. What, she cut him off? "3 times my original comp. 5-year guaranteed term. Paid through my firm. You pay me to stay out of your building, not to fix it from within. But I don't want your title. I want control, through my terms, or you can keep refreshing your dashboard while Wilkins sits on your inventory for the next quarter." She turned to Wilkins. Still holding, Wilkins grinned. "Trucks are parked. Drivers are playing poker. I'll keep feeding them lunch till spring." CEO looked around the boardroom. No help came. He opened the doc. He signed. The room watched as the e-signature populated in the bottom corner of the consulting agreement. "Patricia Simmons, lead compliance consultant, retained through 2030. She turned back to her screen, moved her cursor, clicked the checkbox. QA final sign-off, SH. It flashed green. The system cleared. Treasury's dashboard updated. Wilkins nodded once. "That'll do." Patricia ended screen share. Sat there for a second, just watching, listening to the silence in a room full of people who had, just days ago, considered her irrelevant. Then she said calmly, "You don't need my checklists, just my signature," and logged off. No mic drop, no goodbye, just gone. The trucks started moving before her call fully disconnected. And the company, finally, realized they hadn't just lost a checklist. They'd lost the only person who ever understood why it mattered. And now, they paid for every second she wasn't there. On her schedule, at her price, by her rules. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.